Hello, everyone. Welcome to the MIT Mobility Forum. This is the session 176, where we'll focus on China's mobility transformation, blueprints, behavior, and a global lesson. As many of you know, in the past 2 decades, China built more high-speed rails, metros, shared mobility system than any country in the world, piloting the zero carbon corridors, AI-powered traffic system. So major progress that's happening in China. At the same time, there are also issues like from Xijing's work through the spatial big data analysis, find that many of these high-speed rail new towns struggle to attract residents, while the historical core remain overburdened there. I'll mention maybe 2 points before I introduce the panel. The first one is in terms of the global decarbonization. United States, at least at the federal level, is rejecting its leadership. Right? But China is taking on really as the core mission there. China's interest and effort in climate change is both talk about the global contribution, but also impact the local pollution, it's public health. China's greening of the mobility system is also an industrial policy, also an energy security policy. So all the different objectives well aligned. That's the first point. I'd like the speaker to comment on the examples, the best practice in China, and how the rest of the world can potentially observe and learn. The second part I also want to emphasize, I observe a symmetry of understanding. Since COVID, there's a general decline of exchange and mutual understanding between China and the US on both sides. But I would say, as of now, there are still many Chinese come to America and visit, study, exchange, but much fewer Americans visit China. I just look at some numbers. As of today, there are about 200,000 Chinese students studying in the US, while there are less than 2,000 American students study in China. That's a massive decline from like 2011, there's 15,000 of American students studying in China. I say that to say that even in this forum, we recognize the importance of China, but have not introduced enough of discussion of China's transportation planning practices to this forum. So I'm really glad to have 4 experts join us today to share their experiences. So I invite each of you to introduce yourself briefly. Daizong, please. Daizong, just I invite you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you, Professor. Let me share my screen.
No, sorry. Okay. Daizong, I mean just a brief self-introduction.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Daizong Liu. I'm an East Asia Director for ITDP. Our headquarters is based in New York City, and we are kind of NGO that promotes sustainable transportation globally. I'm based in Beijing. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, Daizong. Xijing?
Good afternoon. My name is Xijing Li. I recently graduated from UNC at Chapel Hill Department of City and Regional Planning, and currently I work at Cal Poly Pomona. And my research interests including the climate change, urban heat island effect, and also the transportation planning.
Great. Thanks, Xijing. Zhenhua?
Hi, everyone. My name is Zhenhua Chen, Associate Professor in City and Regional Planning at The Ohio State University. I'm also the chair for the International Association for China Planning. It's great to be here. Thank you. Looking forward to the discussion.
Very nice. Qing, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Qing Shen. I'm a professor and the director of PhD program in urban design and planning at the University of Washington. Like to mention that I was a long time faculty member at MIT long time ago. So thank you, Jinhua, for inviting me to join back event at MIT.
Wonderful to have you here, Qing. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Daizong will invite you to the first presentation. Please, thanks.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to join that MIT's Mobility Forum. I want to say a lot. I really want to say a lot of things about the China's mobility, but the timing is very limited to the 10 minutes. So I try to speak as soon as possible. First of all, let me introduce my organization, the ITDP. Our headquarters in New York City, and we have 12 offices across the 7 countries. And in China, we have a dual role. That's a part of the dual tank. We are very proud that ITDP have 11 cities in China. We have the underground project like the BRT, and also receive a lot of awards from UNFCCC or World Bank or ADBs. So we are really do the job on the ground with the Chinese local partners. And another role, ITDP China, we are also kind of a think tank. We are deep dive into a lot of policy works and strategy works with the China's government and the local cities. So, and we also participate a lot of media communications events to promote the sustainable transportations. Okay, so that's very quickly to brief about my organization. And the first things I want to show you why China is very ambitious on the EVs. As you may know, currently the Strait of the Hormuz tensions, that's really make these things more easily to understood. Because here I have a figure, that's the EV in the 2025. The adoption of the EV is avoid the oil consumption, almost 70% of the Iran's exports. So that means when China looking at the EV, it's not only the vehicle, the automobiles, the industry, but also the energy security imperative issues. Because everything can make the electricity, like wind, like solar, like a coal, but the oil only coming from oil. So if transportation very depend on the oil, so that means that China's energy is not security. Security is a big challenge, like today's the Hormuz issues. So this is why China very focused on the EV industry. And another issue is you may see in the left figure, China is the largest, the GHG, the CO2 emissions emitters globally. It's almost 1/3 of the global CO2 emission coming from China. And the transportation sector is number 4 largest sector for CO2 emissions emitter. So if China want to combine with climate issues, the transportation decarbonization is also very important. And the interesting thing is the transportation sector is the largest sector of the US. US follows China as the number 2, the CO2 emissions emitter. But the transportation is more important in US, even in US than China. And in the right side, you can find the different vehicle contribute how much of the CO2 emissions. That's almost half and half. 50% of the passenger transport contribute 50% of a CO2 emission coming from passenger, another 50% of CO2 emission coming from the cargo transportations. So based on this, China have very early strategy to promote the EV industry, but they do analysis by the year 2008. The Beijing Olympic Games in 2008, we think is the first year of China planning the strategy to promote the EVs. And at the beginning, they feel the bus is most easily to be electrified. Because at the year 2008, nobody buys the EV because it's very difficult to charge and no charging place. And if nobody buy, then nobody investment to the research, to the manufacturer to build the factories. That is a big chicken and egg deadlock. So this is why China want to have an EV industry. So they select the bus because first of all, bus is a procurement by the subsidy of the government. So government can give a very strong guidance for the bus vehicles. And secondly, bus have the depot. So it's easily to build infrastructure for charging in the bus depot. And thirdly, the bus is only operated almost 25 kilometers per round per circle in China. So it's a very much fit the battery's performance at the early phases. So this is why they thinking buses is very easy to do the first try for the EVs. Then from the 2010, China launch the phases. So from 2009 to 2015, it's a launch phases. They launched the pilots programs, and then 2015 to 2018, it's quickly scaling up. And by the end of the 2018, China quit the subsidy to the EV. So that means the e-buses already can be marketing survived compared with the oil. And please pay attention on the yellow dot line. It's the battery cost. That's based on the per mood of the bus fleet. With the number of the e-bus fleet increase, you can find the battery cost is fell down from 4,000 per RMB per kilowatts to the 1,350. It's almost the drop off 2/3 of the price at the beginning. So that's a quick adopt bus. E-buses reduce the cost of the battery. That's a tipping point, the EV private cars. So this is a very successful story, China, how to move the EV industry to the big skills. And another big thing is infrastructure. When I work with WRI, we have a very good award received from IFF because we have the Chile, Santiago of Chile, to build the largest e-buses fleet out of China with only 600 buses by just 1 year. The reason why we received the award from IFF for the green finance is because a lot of people say they are very difficult for charging facilities, but this project received the guarantee of the money's guarantee of a national grid of Chile. That's because the e-buses is the best customer for the grid systems. You know, the e-bus fleet is very easily to be predictable operating schedules. When the grid gives the supply, it's a line, it's a very stable line, but the demand is weaving. They have a bottom and a peaking, they are weaving. So, but the bus is the best customer for the grid because they can charge during the below the demand below the capacity, and they can even the recharging. That's a V2G when the demand oversides the supplying. And for example, the bus can charge during the night, and nobody use the electricity during the night. So this is why when we sold the bus to the Chile, it not means they need a new power plant. It just means they can use their capacity better, and even the grid is more balanced. So this is why the grid is very support to the bus company to buy the e-buses to operate it. And this one got the award. That's the reason. And after the e-buses and the EV cars, last month, China just published a new 5-year plan. And that's a new 5-year plan. They are coming to the most difficult electrified vehicle type. That means heavy duty trucks. So they announced they will build 10,000 kilometers zero carbon transportation corridors nationwide. So that means both the trucks, the logistic and the private cars will be the zero carbon along these corridors. So this means the last part of the EV industry in China. And they have already started some flagship the pilots in Shanghai corridors. It's almost 450 kilometers. The corridors, they are start using the battery swapping systems. And the free systems, the decarbonization is more complicated compared with private cars because they have a different scenario, like the transport cargo. If you use the freight, the trucks for the mining, for the food, for the high value end, this different scenario. Compared with the passenger car is quite simple. So this have a lot of technology need to be adopted. For example, another pilot corridors, they will try to adopt the e-highway, which is similar as the Siemens in German. And some corridor will adopt like the hydrogen or very quick charging systems. So they have a lot of technologies among the different corridors based on the different the good deliver scenarios. So this is the next big thing. And another one for the passenger transportation in China. This figure shows the question coming from. This is a travel mode share in major Chinese cities like Beijing and Guangzhou before and after pandemic. You can find it easily that in Beijing, the bus readership dropped off very quickly. Almost 40% of the readership is disappeared. But at the meantime, you can find in Beijing, the people using bicycle increased 40%. So it's easily to find from that figure. That means the bus is compete with the bike. They are compete for the passengers. And in Guangzhou, even more serious. You can find the metro system, the subway system even dropped off the readership. And another one, e-bicycles is increased very quickly. So this is a very tough situation that China can handle. That means the bus and the metro compete with the bicycles and the e-bicycles. It's not compete with cars. So if compete with cars, it's easily, we will have buses. But when they compete with the bicycle and the e-bicycles, it's difficult to make decision. But we cannot let the bus and the metro system die. So this is why we noted that integrate the travel chain is maybe one solution, which called the mobility as a service. That was born in Helsinki. It's named WIM. So after 3 years of the WIM's operations, you can find it's very interesting that WIM integrate 7 modes like a bus, bicycle, e-scooters, the city rail and inner city rail together. And they can increase the public transportation share compared with a normal Helsinki citizen. The WIM user using public transportation more. Do you know the reason? Because they are integrate the model very closely. For example, they have 3 times of the WIM user when they take the taxi. They are not go to the destination. They use a taxi go to the bus stop or metro stations. They are transferred to the bus and the metro. So this means they have 3 times more people, even they use a taxi, but they are a part of the trip will be using the public transportation. That's increase the public transportation shares by the integrate. So they are not compete the taxi with the bus. They integrate taxi with bus. So this is the kind of ideas. We are trying to not compete the bicycle, e-bicycle with bus and the metro. We try to integrate it. And Beijing and Shanghai already started action to do the mobility as a service. And Beijing even established a carbon account for users use the mobility as a service. So for example, in Beijing, the normal trip, you have a CO2 emission per kilometers as a standard. If your trips on the mobility as a service platform is lower than that CO2 emissions, you will get the carbon credit back to your account. And that credit you can use to buy the stuffs on the platform, like buy the water, buy food, buy anything. So this is one to encourage people integrate the low emissions, low carbons, the tripping mode, and also to keep our bus readership come back. And then next mode is the autonomous revolution. I think everybody knows that the Waymo is now very hot topic, and the Tesla's FSD is also very important. But you should also pay attention on the China. All of us believe that this year will be the tipping years of robotaxi in China. Like Baidu Apollo is a larger scale implementation in Wuhan. And the Pony AI in Shenzhen, WeRide in Guangzhou already do underground, the real commercial operating now in China. And the Pony also work together with Uber. Now they are developed the European countries, the market. And here I give you some comparison. We can find the Waymo still a leader of the autonomous vehicles, robotaxis. But from the pilots on the ground in the cities, you can find most of, they have more than 30 Chinese cities already have the pilots in the commercial operating on the road. Compared with the US cities, we have more companies, cities. And here I can show you how the Baidu's, the Apollo, the AVs on the Wuhan street. They already have 1,500 the robotaxi on the street of the Wuhan every day. And from this video, you can find how the difficult traffic situations and how the autonomous the vehicles handle with it. If you have interest, because time is limited, if you have interest, you can go to my LinkedIn to see the full videos. And they can even go a very narrow, very crowded with the people street today. And with the robotaxi adoption, we can find in US,
Yeah, thank you, Daizong. Great. Xijing, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. This is my presentation's topic. We know in the past several decades, Chinese megacities experienced a kind of breathtaking and unprecedented urbanization and urban expansion. And as a Chinese born close to 2000, close to Gen Z generation, I witnessed this kind of urbanization process. In my childhood, I witnessed my hometown's neighbor Shanghai's preparation for the World Expo in 2010. And in my middle school, I went to Shanghai to visit the World Expo, and I was shocked by the rapid urban growth and the changes in Shanghai. It takes almost overnight. This kind of rapid urban growth draw the cities, generates a lot of traffic transiting flows towards the city center and cause a lot of associated urban issues, from air pollution to the traffic congestion and to the overwhelming during the rush hours. This kind of phenomena draw my great interest about this Chinese mega city. And to overcome these kind of difficulties and problems, many Chinese megacities like Shanghai, which is the largest city in China, try to make this kind of planned subcenter to try to switch the urban spatial structure and to deal with monocentric urban issues. For this kind of overnight constructed urban subcenters, from the 21st century, they have several features, including the TOD or public transit hub-based. And also within these kind of subcenters, you can find the diverse and sometimes very advanced amenities. Last but not the least, these kind of subcenters with very high building density and commonly construct just within several years, like an overnight construction. So witness this kind of phenomena draw my great interest, whether the planned polycentricity based on the public transit infrastructure can decentralize the Chinese megacities, and whether they can reshape the urban spatial structure and change residents' daily mobility and activity. So driven by this curiosity, I conduct a series of researches guided by my PhD advisor. So firstly, when we check with the taxi transit flow in 2015 in Shanghai, we found it's to our great shock, because you can see for the Shanghai's planned subcenter only attracted only a relatively small share of the taxi transit flows. And this pattern was quite stable across different times and different scenarios, including weekday and weekend, daytime and nighttime. And if the planned subcenters had truly reshaped the urban mobility, we should expect to see stronger and more consistent flow towards those areas. However, when we conduct a core periphery analysis based on the network defined by the taxi trajectory, you can see from different scenarios and different time period, all of the identified core area are pretty far away from those planned subcenters. So driven by this phenomena, that takes why this mismatch happened. We try to extend our scope and take the Shanghai's urban planning history and evolution into consideration. For the past decades, Shanghai's urbanization process, it can be divided into several phases. At the beginning, in the 1980s, you can see this city is still monocentric, and there are some streetcar roads operation and extended to the relatively suburb area. However, from 1990, the Planning Bureau tried to switch the city from monocentric to polycentric. And according to the summary table, you can see during this process, the public transit system, especially the metro line expansion, played a very, very important role. Those kind of metro lines and the stations, just like the lines and nodes, try to reorganize the city and reshape the city's physical structure. So whether this kind of reshaping helpful to examine its urbanization's process and planning's powers association with the urban daily transit flow, we use a cloud-based remote sensing technique to quantify the long-term urbanization, and also take the recent land use into consideration. As the urban daily transit is full of temporal dynamic, so we also take the hourly network importance into consideration, and then use the GTWR model, fully considering the spatial heterogeneity and temporal dynamics. So based on our exploration, first of all, the Shanghai's daily transit flow, you can see in 2015, the city's transit flow and residents' daily mobility are still highly relied on the subway and public transit system. However, regarding to the hotspot and the attraction for the city, you can see still consistently gathering in the urban center. And also because the power list and the track list of those sub-centers, you can see most of the taxi and transit and the subway transit trips are pretty long. It's even longer than the other cities in China, like Shenzhen or Beijing, and Beijing. And also comparing to the temporal dynamic of these kind of urban transiting flows, the spatial structure of the city are still pretty stable and still monocentric. And when we examine the detailed association between the public transit infrastructure and the urban daily transiting flow, you can see the slide show a key mismatch between the public transit infrastructure and actual urban transit flows demand. From the phase 3, which is the most planned phase in the preparation for the World Expo, it constructs a lot of new and novel urban subway and metro infrastructure. However, when you check with their attraction, temporal and localized attraction to the urban transit flow, you can see most of the time period is almost zero, indicating a kind of surplus pattern for this kind of public transit infrastructure. In contrast, for the phase 4, where is the urbanization take place after 2010 in the periphery part of the city, and there are kind of bottom-up precise, you can see due to the lack of the public transit infrastructure, most of the daily transit flow are highly relied on the taxi, and you can see the land urbanization's high attraction to the taxi transit flow. And when we exploring to those kind of amenities, daily and temporal attraction to the urban transit flow, you can see there's also kind of mismatch between the planned phase and the bottom-up phase. For the planned phase, even though in the planned subcenters, it offered a very advanced and diverse facilities. However, the attraction to the daily urban transit flow is pretty low. In contrast, in the periphery area, those booths and dining centers, these kind of facilities very close to residents' daily activity, have a very high attraction to the taxi daily transit flow. So from this kind of exploration, you can see the mismatch in both public transit infrastructure and also the facilities and amenities in the TOD area based on the public transit infrastructure. So when we So this case helps us to think beyond, so the Shanghai's case and phenomena draw my further thinking beyond one city. And a similar question appears at the regional level. Because during my childhood and middle school, I witnessed unprecedented high-speed rail construction in China, and especially in the Para River Delta urban agglomeration. So just within 10 years, the Chinese government invested more than $50 billion and constructed more than 1,500 intercity high-speed rail. They try to utilize the high-speed rail to decentralize this urban agglomeration and try to promote and motivate the development in those areas based on the station area. So these systems are meant to connect the city, support the regional integration, and create new growth centers around the intercity railway stations. But again, the key issue is not only whether people can travel faster. The real question is whether these new stations can become the part of residents' daily lives, and are there jobs nearby, are there service goods or facilities, local activities can attract the residents' gathering. So driven by this question, before I go to the US, I take the intercity railway between the Dongguan and Zhaojing, this blue line. And at that time, this line is just constructed. I was shocked by the low passenger volume at that time. And when I have a short interview with the station officer, he told me every day in that station, in that certain interrail station, it only has around 50 passengers daily. So driven by this phenomena, I try to link the urbanization in the stationary area, intercity rail stationary area, with the real-time residents gathering. So to quantify the regional real-time population gathering, I use a Tencent location-based spatial big data platform, which can cover more than maybe 80% of the Chinese adult by those very popular apps like WeChat, like the Tencent Map, QQ, and other softwares or apps. So then I explore the association between the urbanization process and the attraction to the residents' daily gathering. And the same paradox can also be seen at the regional scale, especially in is that the region has invested heavily in the intercity rails and station and try to promote the station areas development. Hope that new rail stations can support the regional integration and create new growth centers. However, you can see according to their attraction to the population gathering, they're still highly relying on the existing and old urbanized area. For the newly urbanized area, especially in the in some intercity rail alongside in some intercity rail in areas, you can see their attractions are pretty limited. So from the story of those case studies, you can see from the building infrastructure to activating the infrastructure. So Chinese already achieved remarkable progress in transportation construction. The next step maybe is to help these systems to more fully support residents' daily life and build a stronger connection between the transportation infrastructure and residents' daily life, especially in the recent decade when the urbanization in China transferred from the expansion-oriented to the growth-oriented, development-oriented. So how to utilize this kind of abundant and even advance the constructed transportation infrastructure and build a closer connection to residents' daily life. I think it could be the topic for in the coming decade. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Any comments or suggestions are highly appreciated. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Xijing. Sorry for both Daizong and Xi. I was rushing it so much, so I get up through. So next one, we invite Zhenghua for your commentary and presentation. Yeah, please.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you, Jinhua, for the invitation, and thanks for the two presenters to give such a great presentations for today. Here, I provided a brief summaries of this two speakers' talk. I give it a title called From Expansion to Alignment. So hopefully this will give audience a better understanding about what's going on in China in terms of the infrastructure development, right? I find that both presentations are extremely insightful. What really strikes me the most is how complementary they are. Because on one hand, we have seen the power for narrative and transformation. China is rapid expansion of high-speed rail, urban transit, emerging mobility systems. On the other hand, we have also reminded here of a more grounded reality, how people actually move, how spatial patterns evolve in response to, but not always in alignment with these large-scale investment. So as you can see, these talks point out to a very important transitions in China's transportation planning. The key question is no longer simply how to build more infrastructure, but rather how to better align mobility with the lived spatial reality. Now, from my perspective, these raised a broader issues that goes beyond China. What we may think about is a shift from expansion to alignment. In the earlier stage of development, as we see expanding networks, such as building these railways, metro, highway, with the central challenges. But as the system mature, the challenges becomes more complex, which is how to synchronize these infrastructure provisions with the land use, housing, employment, and the actual travel behaviors. So in this sense, what I see in China today is not just a story about success or failure, but it's a very valuable case of what happens when infrastructure capacity expands faster than social and spatial adaptation. Okay, the result can be what Professor Li just described, right? So a situation where new hubs or sub-center structures to attract activities, while traditional cores remain dominant. At the same time, I would frame this is not simply a overbuilding problem, but more a question of temporal and spatial mismatch. Okay, in some cases, these new infrastructure may be ahead of demand. They anticipate a future growth. In other cases, they may reveal deeper coordination challenges between transport planning, land development, and local governance. These also connect very nicely to the first presentation, as Dr. Liu highlighted, China is moving toward the greener, more digital, and more people-centered mobility system. But again, one key question is still, can technological innovation such as AI, mass advanced mobility effectively address these underlying spatial mismatch? Or do we need stronger institutional coordinations across sectors such as housing, land use, and regional development? Finally, from an international perspective, from the international audience perspective, I think the lessons here is especially important. China provides an extreme and illuminating case, not because it's simply ahead or behind, but because it shows both the power and the limits of infrastructure-led transformation. In contrast, I think in countries like the United States, the challenge is often different. It is not necessarily overexpansion, but rather fragmented governance, underinvestment, and difficulties to building at scale. Yet at the deeper level, both contexts, I think, faced a similar question, which is how to achieve a better alignment between the mobility system and social economic structure that I mean to serve. So with that, I will conclude my discussion and looking forward to further discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you, Zhenghua. You very well bring the Daizong and Xijing to present together. Thank you, Zhenghua. Also, you mentioned the word spatial mismatch. I think of Professor Qing studies spatial mismatch, made a major contribution to the scholarship that's 25 years ago, I guess, roughly that time. So please, Qing.
Thank you, Jinhua. I really enjoy both presentations, and Dr. Liu, Daizong's presentation really reminded me how much China has achieved and how much the country has changed in terms of mobility. And every time I learn exciting, fascinating new facts, because as some of you know, that my research has been almost exclusively on the US, especially for the last 10 years or so. So I'm learning new things. And I think that for me, some of the new ideas like zero carbon emission corridor, truly fascinating. It requires particular institutional setting, and also that concept involves different strategies in terms of implementation that may be adaptable to different countries in different ways, which leads to a question about what is truly transferable from China to the US or vice versa. And that often is a challenging question for people who study international comparative, transportation planning and policy. But that I will leave it for possible discussion. In terms of the transit usage change, that's one area where, for example, I imagine US and China can really compare the similarity and also the differences in terms of how to make transit system vibrant. And I have done some, for example, recent survey, focus group, kind of various approach to really learn about the barriers and the opportunities for transit. And I assume similar efforts, but maybe different findings can emerge from studies in China. Let me see what else I can say. One thing that fascinates me about China is, of course, the power of the government that is able to form vision that is grander, I would say, than what we typically see here, and followed with also the investment resource that is also harder for similar projects to be implemented in the US. So there, what we might be able to learn, at least conceptually, in the US. So people like Daizong, you may in the future contribute more in this kind of dialogue. Now, the study, the presentation by Xijing Li, this is exemplary in terms of a new wave of studies by urban planners and, of course, also people in geographic information sciences in general to use multi-source big data to study city phenomena. So a lot of richness, a lot of insights. Of course, I only look at the surface of your study, so I don't know enough about the detail to comment on that. But I basically agree with Zhenghua, the question of alignment. With that, I am questioning, where is the misalignment? How do we know it's actually misalignment? It's not so crystal clear, and I can elaborate when we have time, but a basic phenomenon internationally, not just China, in the US as well, congestion happens in the area of high level of concentration. So does that mean that the investment in suburban rural area in terms of bridges, roads is a misalignment? Think about that. So it's useful to think, I think. Let me see what else I can say here. My time's up, so I can add more perhaps notes when we discuss. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ching. I prepared 5 questions for each of you, but I don't think I should give the time actually to the audience of inviting John here for the Q&A. But I just want to thank both Daizong and Xijing to provide the content, but also Zhenghua and Qing's narrative to bring the two together. So thank you all for presenting this seminar today. John.
Great. Normally I try to cluster these questions, but we really had quite a diversity of questions today. So I want to start first with the second presentation from Xijing. So Robin Chase asked, she writes, in the polycentric new builds, did they plan for and provide all the essential services needed in those new hubs? Food, shopping, health, recreation, schools. And she says, long ago when I visited these new developments, they had almost no retail. Streetscape was blocks of just residential high-rises. Could you sort of give us an update on sort of this polycentric thinking? Do you see still those examples of maybe the lack of 15-minute city thinking, or is it very much a 15-minute city concept?
Thank you so much for the questions. I think for the Shanghai, based on the new plan, the subcenters, they try to offer the diverse and comprehensive amenities, not just for residential. So they try to apply the mixed land use, and also this kind of mixed land use planning are based on the public transit centers like the metro stations. And also, that's also very close to the Hong Kong's New Town planning, because in Hong Kong's New Town, they try to organize residents' daily activities just within the New Town area, almost with no interaction with the downtown in Hong Kong Island. So I think when I check with the Shanghai's evolution, especially for the phase 3 from 2001 to 2010, those subcenters have these kind of similar features with very comprehensive facilities. And you can see the ambition to try to decentralize the city. And that also reminds me the comments from Professor Xijing about the alignment. I think maybe my understanding is very superficial, but I think according to the exploration, the phase 3 that is planned the subcenters, but those subcenters' primary goals maybe not to serve the local residents, but for the preparation of the Shanghai Expo. So to develop the Shanghai Expo garden area, they offer this kind of comprehensive, and centers try to utilize these constructions to decentralize the city. So I think for the alignment, maybe one way to improve the alignment maybe is to think about the purpose of this kind of plan and construction and align with align with the general and more magnificent goal or align with the residents' daily necessities. Because according to the phase 4, you can see the residents the exact attractions and demand from the local residents may be mismatched with the government's planning purpose. That's just my superficial understanding.
Thank you. That's super helpful. If there's anything that you might want to add just about what these transportation hubs look like. You said development is concentrated around the transportation center, the public transit center. Is there something in those centers that just looks and feels different than certainly what we're used to in the United States, but maybe even from what we're used to seeing in Japan or in European cities?
For those kind of public transit centers, some of them, most of them are TOD designed and with very comprehensive and advanced amenities. Sometimes close to the public transit centers, you can see the even the very huge plazas and also next to the plazas, those areas maybe are relatively high-end real estate communities and also with some facilities like museums and recreational area. Because for the sub-centers, it is not just a small town or 15 minutes walking distance area. Because in Shanghai, it has around 7 to 8 planned sub-centers. The area and size are pretty large. And within the sub-centers, it organized many public transit stations and they try to use the public transit infrastructure to link them, to organize them. Just my superficial observation.
Super. Okay, let me shift to a question, and this really is opening it up to all of our guests. So Richard Ajagu asked the question, how does China experience political drag or industrial inertia in the development and implementation of mobility and environmental solutions? And how does it mitigate these challenges to progress? And I think the core of this is a little bit in your commentary, Ching. What you were talking about is that comparative analysis between the US and China and other nations. And I guess, Daizong, I'd start with you. You know, you've traveled around the world. What is it about the Chinese system that you think that people in the United States and Canada and Europe just don't understand well about how the system, you know, functions? Do you have any sort of general observations in that department?
Okay. Thank you, John. You raised a very good questions. First of all, to be honest, China have very strong government, so they are do a lot of works on the, we call it industrial strategy. For example, they want to build some industry like the EV today, like the aircraft, the low altitude. So they will have a. So this is why China have a 5 years plan. So all the people follow the government's the guidebooks to do that things. So it's a very strong. But that's a mode. It's very difficult to apply to some other developing countries because resource the government have and the market size, a lot of factors. So to be honest, I thinking developing different countries should have a very clearly the strategy for some industry development, but the way maybe not like China, very rely on the governance, really on the subsidy works, but we need to develop in some other tools.
Any other general reflections? Remember, the core of Richard's question is, you know, how does China experience sort of political drag or industrial inertia, and how are those challenges overcome? Any other reflections? Okay. All right, let's keep going with some other questions that were in the chat. So Jane Gould was asking specifically about electric vehicle buses. Do we have a sense of the cost? I mean, the project that you shared, Daizong, in Santiago is really interesting. I think it was 600 BYD buses. Do you have a sense of like the cost of those buses?
Yes. during my presentation, I talked after the 2018, China government quit the subsidy of the e-buses procurement.
Yeah.
That's because the whole life's costing the e-buses already, the cost of the e-buses already below the petrol buses. So that means they can survive by the marketing competing. But we need some, they still need some new green finance mechanism because procurement of the e-bus still very high. But when you use the e-bus, operating e-bus with the whole life, maybe 8 to 10 years, they still they are very cheaper. So this is why they need a green finance to, for example, you buy a e-bus, but you didn't buy the battery because the battery is half cost of the buses. You just rent the battery, and using the operating cost saving, you pay back for renting charge. So this can reduce the procurement of the e-buses, the cost, and also you can get the money. So this is why from the overall the whole life cycle's cost, the e-bus already be a very advantage. But for just for procurement, it's still very high. So we need to find a finance mechanism. Yeah.
Yeah, and I thought that was so interesting how you showed the chart with the demand over time of day versus the supply and how the grid integrates with this. Along those lines, Eddie Wilson asked, curious what time of day China's grid is peaking at. So in North America, and of course this may vary across the country, it's a big country, but in North America, school buses have been a good use case for vehicle to grid because they're parked during typical grid peak times, 5 to 9 p.m.-ish. But public buses are often running during those times, so it's a bit more challenging. Any thoughts on that, sort of that integration of the fleet with time of day?
Okay.
And
let me answer this
peak
question.
time is.
Yeah. This is a very good thing. First of all, I also want to emphasize because the readership dropped off of the bus systems. Another way, a lot of Chinese bus company established some company is energy company. So a lot of bus company is really using the energy company to operate the bus battery to get the money to fill the gap of the ticketing loose. So this is the first thing. The second, different cities, they have a different peaking times. For example, the supply peaking in the western of China cities is in the noon because they have a lot of solar powers. So in the daytime, they have a lot of supplies. Then the bus are charging during the daytimes because bus only have the rush hour from the 7:30 to 9:30 a.m. And after 9:30 a.m., almost 80% of the bus don't need to go to the street because the readership have no readership. So that's 80% can charge in after 9:30. And during the night, in Western cities, during the night, they have more demand. So they can recharge back to the grid system and get the money from the night recharging. So different cities really have different things. But the bus, the operating bus rate is very good matching because they are very predictable and easily to management. Yeah.
Super.
Great. It's 1 o'clock. Sorry to interrupt here. First of all, thank Daizong and Xijing. I know each of you probably worth a 1 hour lecture. I squeeze into 10 minutes here. And also thank Zhenghua and Qing really for bringing this together, offer brilliant synthesis. Everybody, please join me. Thank the panel for today's discussion.